your eyes open at 3 in the morning. The room is completely still. The second half of the night is built lighter, shallower sleep, a cooler body, a threshold that quietly lowers on its own. Almost everyone surfaces there. The loop is not made by the waking. It is made in the 90 seconds after. Welcome to Sleepy Science. Nothing in that is broken. Tonight moves with the shape the night already has, instead of against it. Let the room stay dark and quiet around you. The body is already cooling toward its lowest hour, holding you loosely, asking nothing back tonight. One question travels with us into the small hours. Why the body rises there at all? Sleep was never one solid block of stillness. From the outside, a sleeping body looks like a single long pause, unbroken from evening until morning. Inside, the night is closer to a landscape than a lid. It rises and falls, thins and thickens, over and over before the sky changes. Laboratories that record brain waves through the night see a shape with hills and valleys, never a flat line. The depth shifts many times, and the body moves quietly along with it, unnoticed. A question rests underneath all of it, and it can stay open for now. Why does the body come so near the surface in the small hours, and why does that rising settle into a pattern for some people and not for others? Roughly every 90 minutes, sleep completes a full loop and begins again. Researchers call these loops cycles, and an ordinary night holds about 4 to 6 of them. A cycle carries the sleeper down through deeper stages, then back up toward lighter ones, then down once more. The 90-minute figure is an average rather than a rule. Cycles run shorter or longer from one person to the next, and even from one part of a single night to the next. The early cycles lean toward depth. The later ones lean the other way. Nothing about this pattern depends on effort or attention, and no one has to hold it in place. The night keeps its own slow rhythm, folding and unfolding while you lie still inside it. Inside every cycle sit 4 distinct states of sleep. The first, called stage N1, is the thin edge where the mind slips loose but still half hears the room. Stage N2 follows, a broader stage where the body quiets and the brain sends out small bursts of rhythm. Stage N3 is the deep, slow wave stage, the heaviest sleep of the night and the hardest to be drawn out of. Then comes REM, named for the rapid eye movement behind closed lids, where dreams grow most vivid and the body lies almost entirely still. A single night threads through these 4 again and again, in a loose order that changes as the hours pass. 4 rooms in one house, and the sleeper walks through all of them without ever remembering a single door. Between one stage and the next lies a seam, and seams are where the surface comes closest. Sleep does not switch states cleanly, the way a light switch flips. It slides, and during the slide the sleeper is neither held by the old stage nor settled into the new one. Recordings show short, unsettled patches around these handovers. The brain waves loosen, The body shifts. A leg moves. The head turns on the pillow. Most position changes across a night happen right at these joins rather than in the middle of a stage. The sleeper almost never knows a seam has been crossed. Every crossing is a moment near the waterline, close enough to feel the air above it, and then the current carries you gently back down. A healthy night is stitched through with tiny wakings. Sleep laboratories place small sensors on the scalp to record electrical rhythms, and those recordings show short bursts of waking activity scattered all across the dark hours. Researchers call them brief arousals, or micro-arousals, meaning flickers that last a few seconds and sometimes less. They appear in people who describe their sleep as excellent, night after night, year after year. Counting them is routine work in a sleep lab, and finding them is not unusual in the slightest. They belong to the ordinary architecture of sleep rather than standing outside it as a fault. The night you remember as one smooth stretch was broken into many small pieces, and every one of those pieces held you just the same. Readiness to wake is not a fixed setting that holds steady all night. It rises and falls continuously, the way the water height changes along a shoreline. In some minutes, a sleeper sits far from the surface, and a loud sound outside barely registers at all. In other minutes, that very same sound would lift them straight into the room, blinking at the ceiling. Nothing outside has to change for the shift to happen, because the openness itself is moving. Researchers describe this as an ongoing fluctuation woven into the sleeping state, not an interruption of it. Sleep, it turns out, is less a locked door than a door left slightly loose in its frame, swinging a little all night long. Waking and remembering that you woke are two separate events. For a brief awakening to become a memory, the waking usually lasts a couple of minutes or longer. Anything shorter than that tends to leave no trace behind at all. Studies that wake volunteers on purpose find that very short returns to the room vanish before morning arrives, while longer ones survive into the next day. So the number of wakings a person reports is really a count of the ones that lasted long enough to be written down. The others happened, fully and completely, and then closed behind themselves, like water over a dropped stone. The night keeps far more of its own record than the morning ever hands back to you. When someone says they slept straight through, they are describing a memory rather than a measurement. The brain simply holds no record of the short surfacings, so the morning reads the whole night as continuous. Sleep laboratories routinely record wakings that the sleeper never mentions the following day, and the two accounts disagree without either side telling an untruth. One of them is what happened. The other is what got saved. The smooth night and the broken night can easily be the very same night, seen from two different places. Sleeping well has less to do with staying under the entire time than most of us quietly assume. Continuity, it seems, is something the morning writes rather than something the night performs. Two people can have nearly identical nights and describe them in completely different ways. Both surface a handful of times, both drift back down within seconds on most of those occasions. one of them stays awake 90 seconds longer on a single visit, and that one visit gets written into memory. By breakfast, one reports unbroken rest, and the other reports a night full of holes. Side by side, the recordings would look much the same. What separates the two accounts is not the sleep itself, but the record kept of it. So the question quietly changes shape as the evidence gathers. Perhaps it was never whether the body rises at all, since it nearly always does. But what happens inside the small stretch of waking that stays? Sleep scientists use a plain phrase for how hard it is to wake someone: the arousal threshold. In everyday terms, it is the size of the nudge the world gives before a sleeper returns to the room. A high threshold means a knock, a car door. A name spoken nearby can all pass through unnoticed. A low threshold means the smallest sound in the hallway is enough. The threshold gets measured in laboratories by playing tones at rising volume and noting where the sleeping brain responds. It is not a personality trait, and it does not hold steady from hour to hour. It moves through the night like a water level, and everything depends on where it happens to sit when the sound arrives. During the deep, slow wave stage, that threshold sits at its highest point of the whole night. Far louder sound is required to draw a sleeper out of stage N3 than out of the lighter stages around it. In laboratory work, this shows up plainly. As the volume needed for a response climbs steeply once slow waves take over the recording, people pulled from deep sleep often surface confused, unsure of the hour or even the room, and the fog can take several minutes to clear. Lighter stages release a sleeper far more easily and far more cleanly. Depth is not merely a description of how sleep feels from inside. It is a real distance from the surface, and it can be measured in ordinary decibels. Not every sound weighs the same to a sleeping brain. A person's own name, spoken quietly, can reach them when a louder but meaningless noise does not. Laboratory work has compared responses to a sleeper's own name against other names and neutral tones, and the sleeping brain answers the one that belongs to it differently. Meaning appears to survive into sleep, at least in some rough and simplified form. The sleeping mind is not only measuring volume, it seems to be sorting, weighing, deciding what deserves a reply. That sorting runs without any awareness or consent from the person lying there. Some part of you stays quietly on duty, listening for what matters. Through all the dark hours you will never remember. One of the clearest signs of that sorting carries a name: the K complex. It is a large, slow wave that appears in the recording of a sleeping brain, often arriving just after a sound does. Researchers have studied it for decades and still describe its role in more than one way. Some read it as a small protective response, a wave that absorbs the disturbance and keeps sleep intact for a while longer. Others read it as the opening step of a surfacing that simply never finished. Both readings point toward the same quiet truth. The sleeping brain received that sound and did something about it. Somewhere well below awareness, a decision was made on your behalf, and you slept on without ever learning about it. Parents of young children often describe a strange kind of hearing at night. A truck passing on the road leaves them undisturbed, while a small sound from the next room lifts them instantly. Researchers have looked at this selective responsiveness, and the picture is not fully settled, since the effect is easier to describe than to measure cleanly in a laboratory. What can be said is that the sleeping brain does not treat every sound as equal, and familiarity seems to carry some weight in the sorting. The nervous system appears to keep a short list of what deserves an answer in the dark. Love, it seems, can lower a threshold without ever asking permission from the person who is asleep. In 2017, a research team led by the anthropologist David Sampson recorded the sleep of Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, where people rest close together in groups. Across many monitored nights, almost no moment passed with the entire group asleep at the same time. Someone was nearly always awake, or lightly stirring, and no one had arranged it that way. The researchers connected this to what is called the sentinel hypothesis, the idea that scattered wakefulness across a sleeping group offers a kind of natural watch. No individual has to volunteer for the role. It emerges on its own from the ordinary differences between sleepers. Your own small wakings may be the last quiet echo of a night watch that nobody was ever assigned. Within any group of sleepers, the preferred hours vary more widely than people expect. Some settle early and rise early, others do neither. And the difference holds even when their days look identical. Researchers call this a chronotype, meaning simply the hours a particular body leans toward on its own. In a shared sleeping space, that spread means waking hours overlap and stagger instead of lining up neatly. What looks like mild inconvenience inside one household may have been quietly useful across long stretches of human history. The early riser and the late sleeper were never truly in conflict with one another. Between the two of them, without any agreement, the dark hours were covered from both ends. Old diaries, court records, and household manuals contain a phrase that has fallen out of use. Writers in pre-industrial Europe described the night as arriving in two portions, with a stretch of quiet waking set between them. The references appear casually, without explanation, much the way we might mention breakfast in a letter. Nobody was defining a condition or recording a complaint. They were describing an ordinary night, the way a person might describe weather. For a long stretch of human history, waking in the dark was not a problem waiting to be solved. It was simply the place where one part of the night ended and the next had not yet begun. The idea that a proper night means 8 unbroken hours is younger than it feels. It spread alongside artificial light, factory clocks, and shift schedules. When sleep began competing with a timetable it had never faced before, earlier nights were measured by darkness and season rather than by a single number. The 8-hour figure slowly hardened into a standard to be met, and anything short of it began to look like a personal failure. A useful average had quietly become a rule. That rule now sits in the room at 3 a.m, waiting, and most people never noticed the moment they agreed to be judged by it. No animal sleeps with the door completely shut. Dolphins, and several kinds of birds rest one half of the brain at a time, keeping one eye open and one hemisphere alert while the other side recovers. Many land mammals sleep in short, broken bouts, surfacing again and again through the dark. Nothing in the natural record describes a creature that switches itself entirely off until morning. Sleep, wherever it appears, is built with a way back out of it. Human sleep is deeper and longer than most, and it kept the same feature anyway. The door is quieter in us, and it is still a door. Falling asleep is not a switch being thrown. Recordings show different regions of the brain changing state at slightly different moments. So, for a while, part of you is asleep and part of you is not quite there yet. Leaving sleep works the same way in reverse, unevenly, region by region. There is no clean line where one state stops and the other starts. Only a gradient the body slides along. That gradient is why a person can answer a question in the night and remember nothing of it by morning. Between fully asleep and fully awake lies a wide country, and you cross part of it several times before dawn. The threshold is not one wall, but several. Researchers measure it separately for sound, for touch, for temperature, and for signals arriving from inside the body. A sleeper who barely stirs at a passing truck may surface at a cool draft or a full bladder without any trouble at all. The senses do not share a single setting, and each one has its own level to be crossed. That is part of why two people in the same room, hearing the same night, wake for entirely different reasons. Whatever reached you last night came through a door of its own, on a lock that only it could turn. The same event can be filed under two very different names. A person who opens their eyes at 3 and treats it as an ordinary turn of the night lies there loosely, and often drifts back under. A person who files the identical moment under insomnia begins evaluating, comparing, and counting the hours left. The body underneath is doing the same thing in both cases, with the same lightened sleep and the same lowered threshold. What differs is only the label placed on the moment in its first seconds. Researchers who study how people read their own sleep find that reading carries real weight. A word is a small thing to be holding at 3 in the morning, and it can shape the entire hour. Everything gathered so far points steadily in one direction. Surfacing in the night is ordinary, common, and built into the design. The stages allow it. The seams invite it. The threshold falls to meet it. And most people who sleep well pass through it without ever knowing they did. Yet something clearly separates a night that closes over quietly from a night that opens into hours of lying awake in the dark. That difference cannot be the waking itself, because the waking is nearly universal. So the shape of the question narrows a little. If rising toward the surface is simply what nights do, then whatever builds a returning pattern is made of something else, added after the eyes are already open. A flicker and a full return are not the same event, though both get called waking. A brief arousal lasts seconds. The brain lifts. The body shifts. And sleep closes over again before awareness has time to arrive. A full awakening lasts long enough for orientation to come back, bringing the room, the hour, and the sense of being a person lying in a bed. The first kind happens many times a night in nearly everyone alive. The second happens far less often, and only that second kind leaves a memory behind. Sleep researchers keep the two carefully apart when they score a recorded night. Most of what the body does in the dark never reaches the person it belongs to. Notice how much of tonight has circled one narrow band of hours. The seams between stages, the lowered threshold, the old two-part nights, the divided sleep under long darkness. All of it gathers in the small hours rather than spreading evenly across the dark. Something about that stretch, roughly between 2 and 4, leaves the surface unusually close to the sleeper. It is not that the body chooses that particular window and goes looking for it. The window already seems to be open by the time the body arrives there. Why the second half of the night is built so differently from the first is a question the dark hours have been asking quietly all along, and it deserves a slow answer rather than a quick one. This first stretch of the night is behind us now, and nothing in it asked anything of you. A quiet subscribe lets another restless hour find this company. Now, let the breath slow, one sleepy soul at a time. The first 2 cycles of a night hold nearly all of the deepest sleep. That deep stage is called stage N3, or slow wave sleep, and it shows up on lab recordings as long, rolling waves. Sleep researchers see the same shape night after night, in ordinary sleepers of every age. Stage N3 loads heavily into the early hours, then gives up its share to the other stages. Someone who falls asleep at 11 has usually taken most of their deep sleep before 2 in the morning. The rest of the night still counts, but it is made of different material. The night, it turns out, spends its heaviest currency first. As the hours pass, deep sleep thins. Each cycle still runs about 90 minutes, but the amount of stage N3 inside it keeps shrinking. In the opening cycle, slow waves may fill a long, unbroken stretch. By the 3rd or 4th, they appear in short patches, and then barely at all. Nothing has gone wrong when this happens. The pressure that drives deep sleep has largely been spent, so the night stops spending it. What remains is a lighter kind of rest, closer to the surface, easier to rise out of. The night does not fail near its end. It simply changes material. The slow waves that filled your first hours are already thinning, without any signal from you. That thinning is not a fault in the night. It is the night finishing one kind of work and beginning another. And the question we carried in is still standing open. Why the small hours, and not some other stretch of the dark? Part of the answer lives in this very shift. Your temperature is drifting downward as you lie here, and your sleep is growing lighter, exactly the way it was built to. What comes next follows that lightening, hour by hour. REM segments grow longer as morning approaches. In the first cycle, a REM period may last only a few minutes. By the final cycles, It can stretch across half an hour or more. REM is the stage of vivid dreaming, quick eye movement, and a brain that looks close to awake on a monitor. The night saves most of it for the end. So the nearer you come to morning, the more of your sleep is spent in that active, story-making state. The night does not run one single program. It runs two of them, in slowly shifting proportion. By 3 in the morning, most sleep is either light NREM or REM. The heavy, slow-wave stage has largely finished its work for the night. What is left is stage N2, the long middle ground of sleep, and the lengthening REM periods woven between. Both of them sit closer to the surface than deep sleep does. A sound outside, a shift in the sheets, a signal from the bladder. Any of these now lands on thinner ice. The small hours are not a worse part of the night. They are a shallower part, by ordinary design. Sleep pressure has a chemical name. Through every waking hour, a molecule called adenosine gathers in the brain, and its rising level makes sleep feel heavier and nearer. Sleep clears that molecule away. Most of the clearing happens early, alongside the deep, slow-wave stretch that opens the night. By the small hours, much of the day's accumulated load is already gone. The debt has largely been paid off. Not entirely, but for the most part. What holds you asleep after that is something other than pressure. A second force, running on a different schedule entirely. In 1982, a Swiss researcher named Alexander Borbély described sleep as two forces working together. He called them Process S and Process C. Process S is the pressure that builds while you are awake and drains while you sleep, like water filling and emptying a basin. Process C is the body clock's daily rhythm, a slow wave that rises and falls whether or not you slept at all. Sleep settles in where the two of them line up. The model is decades old now, and it remains one of the plainest maps anyone has drawn of a night. Something has changed by 3 in the morning inside that two-part model. Process S, the pressure, has already drained through the early hours. It is low. Whatever the long day poured in has mostly drained back out. Almost everything still holding sleep together now comes from Process C, the clock's own rhythm. One of the two supports has quietly stepped back. The remaining support is real and steady, but it is working alone. A brief noise or a turn in bed meets less resistance than it would have met at midnight. Same sleeper, same bed, different hour, different footing. Core body temperature falls through the night. It begins drifting down in the evening and keeps sinking through the dark hours. The lowest point arrives roughly 2 hours before a person's usual waking time. For many people, that floor lands somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. The drop is small, a fraction of a degree, but the body is precise about it. Every night, the same slow descent, the same shallow valley near dawn. When the eyes open in that hour, they open at the coldest point of the entire day. Falling asleep begins with the body giving heat away. blood vessels in the hands and feet widen, and warmth flows outward through the skin at the edges. That is why hands and feet often feel warm just as sleep arrives, while the core quietly cools. The body is not losing hold of its temperature. It is lowering that temperature on purpose, through its own outer edges. A cooling center and warm extremities travel together, night after night. Sleep, seen this way, begins as an act of releasing heat into the room. At the bottom of that temperature curve, the body is at its quietest. Heart rate sits low. Breathing runs even and slow. Metabolic activity has eased to its daily minimum. Everything measurable has been turned down together, and the lowest hour of temperature sits beside the lowest hour of nearly everything else. It makes a strange picture. The moment the body is most still is also the hour when many people find their eyes open. Stillness and surfacing share the same stretch of clock, and neither one causes the other. During REM sleep, the body stops defending its temperature. Shivering and sweating largely pause, and the usual thermostat falls silent for the length of the dream period. For those minutes, you drift closer to the temperature of the room around you. Because REM periods run longest near morning, these pauses stretch out through the small hours. A cool bedroom is felt differently then than it was at midnight. In the same bed, under the same blanket, the body has handed the question of warmth over to the room for a while. Set all of it side by side and a pattern appears. Deep sleep loads into the front of the night. REM lengthens toward dawn. Sleep pressure drains early. Core temperature bottoms out in the small hours, and the thermostat idles during dreams. Every one of these is an ordinary feature of a healthy night, not a flaw inside one. So the lightness of the late night is the architecture itself, not damage done to it. Which leaves the question standing elsewhere. If the opening is built in, why does it turn nightly for only some people? Brief arousals cluster at the seams. Sleep recordings show that short surfacings, a few seconds of faster brain activity, gather where one stage hands off to another. The edges of REM are especially crowded with them. The transition itself seems to be the thin place in the fabric. Since the late night is packed with these handoffs, it is also packed with small openings. Most of them close again before memory can record anything at all. The night is a stitched thing, and like any stitched thing, it is loosest where the pieces meet. Waking out of REM is unlike waking out of any other stage. The dreaming brain is already active, already running images and narrative at full speed. When the eyes open from there, the mind does not start up from stillness. It continues. Thought arrives mid-sentence, carrying momentum it borrowed from the dream a moment earlier. That is part of why a 3 a.m. waking so often feels like landing in the middle of something. Nothing had to switch on. Something was already running, and you simply walked into the room where it was. That mid-sentence quality, a mind already moving before the eyes agree to open, may be familiar from your own small hours. Nothing here asks you to work any of it out. Let one breath go all the way out, slower than the one before it. The room is dark, the hour is soft, and we keep drifting through this together. Dreams are remembered best when waking comes straight out of REM. The content is still present in the moment of surfacing, before it fades. Since REM periods are longest and most frequent near morning, wakings in the small hours land inside them far more often. That is one reason a 3 o'clock waking can feel so vivid and so close. The last thing the mind was doing was building a world out of nothing. The images thin within minutes. But for a breath or two, the night still seems lit from inside. Evening holds a stretch of hours when sleep is hardest to enter. Researchers call it the wake maintenance zone, and it usually falls in the few hours before a person's normal bedtime. Tiredness can be considerable then, and sleep still will not come. The body clock is holding a door shut. That same clock opens the door later, without being asked and without any change in how tired the body is. Buried in that odd window is something worth carrying into the small hours. The hour on the clock changes what the same tiredness can do. Sleep is gated by timing, not by fatigue alone. Cortisol keeps a schedule of its own. The hormone sinks to its lowest level a few hours after sleep begins. It stays down through the middle of the night. Then it starts climbing again across the final hours before waking, every night, on time. That climb is written into the body's daily rhythm. It shows up in people who sleep well and in people who sleep badly, on calm nights and difficult ones alike. It is not a reply to whatever happened in the dark. It is a rhythm that was already running. The way water moves up a shoreline, whether or not anyone is standing there to notice. The highest cortisol reading of the day does not fall in the night at all. In most people, it arrives roughly 30 to 45 minutes after the eyes open for the morning, a pattern researchers named the cortisol awakening response. The ordering is the interesting part. The peak follows waking. It does not lead it. Anyone who has been told that a hormone surge hauls them out of sleep at 3 in the morning has the sequence turned around. The morning rise is a morning event, and the small hours sit far below it on the same curve. The meaning of that morning rise is still being argued over. For years, it was read as the body reacting to the act of waking, a burst of hormone set off by the return of consciousness. Then, in 2025, an analysis appeared in Proceedings of the Royal Society B. It reported that awakening was not associated with an increased rate of cortisol secretion. If that finding holds, the rise belongs to the clock rather than to the moment of opening one's eyes. Neither reading has settled yet. The honest position tonight is that the question remains open, and careful people are still working on it. A tide makes a better picture here than a bell. A bell rings at something. A tide simply rises. Cortisol moves through the second half of the night, the way water climbs a beach. Slowly, on a schedule set somewhere else, indifferent to whether anyone is awake to watch. Someone whose eyes open at 3 in the morning is standing in that water, not being wrung awake by it. The hormone was already on its way up before the eyes moved. Two ordinary things sharing 1 hour, neither of them pulling on the other. What follows the opening of the eyes may matter more than the opening did. There is a short window, something on the order of 90 seconds, in which the rest of the night can go either way. Attention can drift back toward the pillow, and the arousal closes without leaving a trace anywhere. Or attention can catch on something, a task, a worry, the shape of tomorrow, and the body begins organizing itself around being awake. Nobody chooses this deliberately. It is a fork the night takes quietly, in less time than it takes to describe it. Sleep laboratories record these brief surfacings in nearly everyone. People who describe their sleep as excellent have them. People who describe their nights as broken have them too, in similar numbers, at similar hours. The recordings resemble one another far more than the two experiences of the night do. So the question this hour began with has quietly turned on its side. It was never really about who wakes and who does not, because everyone wakes. What separates one person's night from another's is what unfolds in the minutes afterward. And that is a different question altogether. Turning toward the clock changes what the moment is made of. Before the glance, there is only darkness and a body lying still. After it, there is a number and a subtraction. 4 hours and 10 minutes left, if sleep returns this instant. People who study broken sleep have noticed how often this checking appears. They also note how reliably it turns a neutral stretch of dark into an accounting problem. The arithmetic is usually wrong anyway. But the mind now has a job, and a job keeps a body awake more effectively than any hormone in the bloodstream. Time in the dark does not measure itself accurately. When people are asked in the morning how long they lay awake, their estimates tend to run considerably longer than the recordings show. 20 minutes can be remembered as an hour. Sleep researchers describe a wider version of this as sleep state misperception, where the felt night and the measured night pull apart from each other. No fault sits inside that gap. Waking carries a clarity that sleep does not. So the waking parts of a night leave deeper marks on the record that memory keeps. Two people wake at 3 o'clock on the same ordinary night. One turns over, feels the weight of the blanket, and is gone again inside a minute. By morning, that waking has left no trace at all. The other opens their eyes and the whole day arrives alongside them. Tomorrow's list. Last week's conversation. The arithmetic of hours remaining. The two bodies did the same thing. The same architecture surfaced at the same hour, for the same unremarkable reasons. Everything that made those 2 nights different happened after that. In the dark, in the quiet, inside a minute and a half. 2 nights built out of one identical moment. You may already know which of them you have been living lately, and that knowing can tighten something across the chest. It usually travels with a second, quieter thought, that the difference says something about you. Let that thought stay where it is for now, unanswered, neither argued with nor believed. Feel the weight of your body where it meets the bed. That weight is asking nothing of you. What comes next moves further into those minutes after the eyes open, and into what has been quietly building there. Late cycles are not simply thinner versions of early ones. Their whole mixture changes. Stage N2 becomes the long middle ground of the late night, holding more of those hours than any other state. It is genuine sleep, restful and real, yet it sits nearer the surface than the slow-wave stage it replaced. The night does not weaken as it goes. It changes materials. The way a builder switches from stone to timber partway up. What stands in the small hours is a lighter structure by construction, and lighter structures move more in the wind. Inside stage N2, the brain produces brief bursts of fast rhythm called sleep spindles. Each one lasts about a second. Researchers have described them as a kind of filter, softening incoming signals before they reach the deeper layers of hearing. Spindle rates vary a great deal between people. In laboratory work, sleepers who produce more of them have tended to hold their sleep through noise that woke others in the same room. Some of what looks like willpower or luck may be this quiet. Involuntary shielding, running all night without anyone's knowledge. The kidneys work on a schedule too. At night, they slow the production of urine, helped by a hormone that concentrates it while the body rests. That suppression is what allows a long stretch of sleep to pass undisturbed. It is one of the least discussed pieces of nighttime engineering, and one of the most useful. The arrangement softens gradually across a lifetime, which is part of why night visits to the bathroom become more common with age. The body has not broken a rule. One of its quieter agreements has simply loosened by a degree. A full bladder rarely creates an awakening on its own. More often, it meets one that was already forming at a seam between stages. The signal had been present for a while, held below the threshold, unnoticed. When the threshold drops in the small hours, that same steady signal finally crosses it. The bladder does not open the door. It walks through a door that the architecture of the hour had already left ajar, and then it takes the blame for having opened it. Room temperature matters more at 4 in the morning than at midnight. The body sets aside its thermostat during dream sleep, and dream periods run longest near dawn. That leaves the room doing more of the deciding in the late hours than it did earlier. A bedroom that felt comfortable at bedtime can feel cool or close by the small hours, with nothing in the room having changed at all. The sleeper has changed. Warmth has quietly become a shared arrangement between the body and the air around it. Alcohol splits the night in two. It shortens the time it takes to fall asleep and deepens the first stretch, which is why it can feel like an aid. As the body clears it, the effect reverses. The second half of the night grows fragmented, with more surfacings and lighter sleep than usual. The relief was borrowed from the hours that followed it. Anyone who has fallen asleep easily and then found themselves wide awake at 3 has met the repayment end of that arrangement. Caffeine has a long tail. It works by blocking the very molecule that carries sleep pressure, sitting in its place without doing its work. Roughly half of a dose is still circulating 5 hours later, and a smaller share lingers for hours beyond that. an afternoon cup can still be present in the blood at midnight. It rarely prevents sleep outright, which is why it is easy to dismiss. What it does instead is thin the pressure that would otherwise have held the later hours closed. Sleep changes shape across a lifetime. The deep slow wave stage begins declining in early adulthood and keeps shrinking decade by decade. Brief surfacings grow more numerous in step with that decline. An older sleeper often has a night built almost entirely from the lighter materials, with only a small foundation of the deep stage beneath it. Nothing has gone wrong in that architecture. It is the ordinary arc of a sleeping body moving through time, and it arrives for everyone who lives long enough. The timing shifts as well. Across later decades, the whole rhythm tends to slide earlier. The evening pull towards sleep arrives sooner, and the floor of the temperature curve moves back toward the middle of the night. 3 in the morning, therefore, sits at a different place on the curve for a person of 70 than for a person of 25. For one, it is deep in the descent. For the other, it is already part of the climb. The same hour on the same clock is not the same hour inside the body. Light in the evening pushes the whole rhythm later. Bright screens and bright rooms in the hours before bed delay the timing of the body's night. Sleep is then invited later than the alarm allows, and the two ends of the night stop agreeing with each other. The effect is modest on any single evening and cumulative across many of them. It is one of the few pieces of this picture that ordinary life reaches easily. That may be why it receives more attention than everything else here combined. Sound behaves differently against a lighter night. A passing vehicle, a partner turning over, a pipe settling inside a wall. All of these are present at midnight and mostly absorbed. The same sounds arriving at 4 in the morning meet a much lower threshold. Nothing about the noise has grown louder in the meantime. The listener has risen closer to the surface, and the ordinary background of a house finally reaches them. Houses are never silent. Sleepers are simply further away from them for part of the night. Line up all of these, and something worth noticing appears. Bladder, room temperature, a late drink, a passing car, the slow arithmetic of age. Each one gets named, at some point, as the reason for a 3 o'clock waking. None of them acts alone. Each is a small signal meeting a threshold that had already dropped for reasons of its own. They are not causes so much as visitors. They arrive through a door that the night had quietly opened by itself, and they get remembered as the ones who opened it. From here, the question moves out of the body's architecture and into what follows it. Researchers who study long-running sleep trouble often work with a framework they call hyper-arousal. The idea is of a nervous system running at a slightly higher setting around the clock, not only at night. It is a framework rather than a settled mechanism, and the evidence behind it remains mixed. Still, it names something many people recognize at once: the sense of being switched on when nothing in the room has switched them on. One model within that framework is called conditioned arousal. Some researchers propose that when many nights of wakefulness happen in the same bed, in the same room, the setting itself begins to signal alertness. The pairing forms without anyone intending it. in the way most learning does. This remains a clinical model rather than a proven pathway, and careful people describe it in exactly those terms. It is offered here as one way researchers have tried to explain why the difficulty so often attaches itself to a particular room. If that model holds even partly, the shape of the problem changes. A pattern that has been learned is not the same thing as a body that has failed. Learning implies a history, a sequence of ordinary nights that added up over time. That is a different sort of thing from something wrong at the level of machinery. Whether or not the model survives further testing, it points toward a gentler question. It is a kinder one than most people ask themselves in the dark at 3 in the morning. In 1987, the researcher Arthur Spielman offered a 3-part way of thinking about persistent sleep trouble. There are predisposing traits a person already carries. There is a precipitating event that begins the trouble. And there are perpetuating factors that keep it going long after the original cause has passed. The model has shaped a great deal of clinical work since then. Like any framework, it simplifies. What it captures well is that beginnings and continuations are often two entirely separate stories. The starting event tends to fade first. A deadline passes. An illness resolves. A season of grief softens into something quieter and more bearable. The nights, in many accounts, do not simply return to how they used to be. What remains are the arrangements built around the trouble. The earlier bedtimes, the careful planning, the watchfulness. The scaffolding outlasts the repair it was raised for. That is a very ordinary thing for scaffolding to do when nobody remembers to take it down. In 1972, the psychologist Richard Boutsin described a clinical approach built directly on that idea, known as stimulus control. The reasoning was that if a bed can come to signal wakefulness, the pairing might be reversed by changing what happens there. Clinicians have used versions of it ever since, always within a structured program and with a person guiding it. It is mentioned here as part of the history of the idea, not as anything to attempt alone at 3 in the morning. Attention has a way of narrowing around whatever is at stake. The researcher, Colin Espy, has described a pathway running from attention to intention to effort. In it, sleep becomes first a subject of monitoring and then a target of active trying. The proposal is that the monitoring itself helps sustain the wakefulness it was watching for. This is a model under continuing study rather than an established fact. What draws people to it is how closely it matches the feel of a night spent supervising one's own sleep. Sleep is unusual among human activities in resisting effort. Most things yield to trying harder. This one withdraws from it entirely. Studies of what researchers call sleep effort have reported the same pattern from several directions. The harder the attempt, the further away the result. It resembles trying to relax a muscle by squeezing it. The instruction and the outcome point in opposite directions, and no amount of sincerity resolves the contradiction. Wanting it more has never once helped anybody arrive there faster. Then there is the second thought that arrives after the first. The eyes open, and somewhere behind the tiredness comes a quieter line. This is the 4th night this week. and something is wrong with me. That sentence is not part of the waking. It is added on top of it, in the dark, by a mind that has very little else to occupy it. And it lands on a night that, measured on any instrument in any laboratory, would have looked entirely ordinary from beginning to end. Expectation colors the report. In some studies, people were told on waking that their sleep had measured as good or as poor. Their descriptions of how they felt tended to follow what they had been told. The instruments, meanwhile, had recorded something else entirely, and the gap between the two was wide. This does not mean the felt experience is false, and nobody is inventing their tiredness. It means the story carried into the morning has a hand in shaping that morning, alongside whatever the night itself actually contained. Cognitive models of sleep trouble rest on that same observation. They propose that the interpretation placed on a waking does much of the work of turning it into a difficulty. Change what the moment is taken to mean, these models suggest, and the moment itself begins to behave differently. The claim is modest and still under active study. What it offers the person lying awake is at least a second reading of an event that had seemed to carry only one. The mixture is changing in you already, without instruction. Stage N2. The long middle ground is taking over the hours ahead, and the spindles that soften sound are firing on their own schedule. Nothing here is waiting on your permission or your effort. Something has been gathering across these hours, close now to being said plainly, about what a waking in the night actually is. You can let your hands go heavy while it comes. There is nothing left for you to arrange tonight. Lying still in the dark is not nothing. Even without sleep, a resting body keeps its metabolic rate low, its muscles quiet, its breathing slow and even. Researchers are careful on this point, and quiet rest is not a replacement for sleep. Still, a wakeful stretch spent lying quietly is not the empty void it feels like at the time. The hour is doing more than the person inside it can perceive, which is true of a great deal of the night. Set the whole hour down in a single line, and it comes to this. Waking in the night is not sleep failing. It is the architecture of sleep briefly showing above the surface, exactly where that architecture was built to be thinnest. The waking itself is not the difficulty. The difficulty is the alarm that gets fastened to the waking, and the long hour of accounting that follows it. One of those two things is built into the night. The other one was added afterward, by use. A night has a shape, and you have been living inside that shape your whole life. It slopes down into the heavy hours, then rises slowly toward the light. You have never seen it from outside. You have only ever been somewhere along the curve, feeling whatever that place along the curve feels like. Tonight you are somewhere on it again, the way you always are. The early hours carried the heaviest work. Slow waves moved through the dark, like weather over a field, and none of it asked anything of you. What comes after is lighter by design, thinner in the way that upper branches are thinner. Nothing has been taken away. The night simply changes what it is made of as it goes. And it has always done this. There is a flaw to the night, a coldest point somewhere before dawn. It is a place, not a failing. Every sleeping body on this side of the planet is passing through some version of it right now. If your eyes open near that flaw, they open where the whole world is coolest and quietest. It is a strange place to find yourself, and a very ordinary one. Thousands of small wakings have already passed through your life without leaving a name. Last week held some. Last night probably held several. They opened and closed again before anything could be written down. You slept through your own surfacings, over and over, across whole decades. The ones you remember are rare visitors rather than the rule. Tonight simply happens to be one of the nights that left a mark. Your body did not consult you about any of this. It lowered its temperature without asking. It thinned its deepest sleep on schedule. It opened small windows at the seams and closed most of them again. All night, decisions were made on your behalf by something that has been making them since long before you had any opinion about sleep at all. None of that machinery waits for instructions. It never has. Where two things are joined, the cloth is always thinnest. Sleep is stitched from stages, and the stitching shows most in the dark hours before morning. That thinness is not damage. It is how the pieces are held together at all. Every seam you have ever slept through was doing exactly this, quietly, while you noticed nothing at all. Thousands of them held. A handful of them opened. That is the ordinary ratio of a life. A car passing at 4 in the morning is no louder than a car passing at midnight. You are simply nearer the surface when it goes by. The house makes the same sounds all night long. Only the distance changes. Whatever reached you tonight had been there all along, waiting for you to drift up close enough to hear it. The dark is not a diagnosis. Lying awake at 3 tells you the hour and very little else. It does not measure your health, your character, or the shape of tomorrow. It is a fact about where you are on a curve. Nothing more. The night has never been able to assess anybody, though it does a convincing impression of trying. Every generation before yours has been awake in this same hour. Some of them lit a candle. Some of them lay still and listened to a house settle. None of them had a word for a sleep disorder because none of them expected the night to be unbroken. The hour is not new. Only our idea about it is somewhere tonight, in another time zone, someone is awake in their own version of it, thinking the same thought you are. Old writing treated the gap between sleeps as unremarkable, the way we treat a pause between two songs. It was simply part of how a night went. People rose, moved about, and lay down again. The record is quiet and matter of fact. There is something steadying in reading a description of your own 3 o'clock, written down by a stranger 400 years before you were born. They were not troubled by it. They simply noted what happened and went back to bed. Most arousals close by themselves. No decision is involved. Attention drifts. The body settles. The seam knits back together, and nothing is left behind for morning to find. That closing is happening tonight too, in millions of dark rooms, in people who will describe their sleep tomorrow as perfectly unbroken. They are not sleeping differently from you. They are only remembering differently. The night handled the rest for them, exactly as it does for you. Almost everything your night does, it does without you. Temperature, timing, the mixture of stages, the opening and shutting of small doors. You are not the operator here. You are the one being carried. The carrying does not pause when you wake briefly to check on it, and it does not resume because you finally settled. It simply continues, all the way through until morning, at its own pace. There is a short stretch after the eyes open that belongs to no one in particular. It is not a test. Nobody grades it. Some nights, attention drifts back and the stretch closes. Some nights, it catches on something and opens wider. Both have happened to you many hundreds of times already. Neither version says anything at all about who you are. It is a stretch of time, not a verdict, and it passes either way. The mind that narrates the night is not the same as the night itself. One of them is measured in stages and temperatures. The other is measured in sentences. And sentences at 3 a.m. are rarely fair. The night keeps no record of what was said about it. Only you carry that part into the morning, and it is usually the only part that still hurts by breakfast. The night itself has already let go. So the thing we started out looking for was never really the waking. The waking has been here the whole time, in every night, in every century, in nearly every sleeping body. It was never the rare event. What varies from one person to another, and from one night to the next, is only what gets built on top of it afterward. The foundation is the same everywhere. The building is not. An ordinary night, written out on paper, looks a great deal like the one you are having. Cycles, seams, surfacings, a cold hour before dawn. Show someone the chart without saying whose it is. They could not pick out the person who feels they cannot sleep. The trace looks calm either way. The suffering, real as it is, lives somewhere the pen never reaches. Tides do not check whether anyone is watching. They rise on their own schedule and fall the same way. Something similar has been moving through you all night, unhurried, indifferent to observation. It was rising before your eyes opened, and it kept rising afterward, at exactly the same rate. Being awake for part of it changed none of its arithmetic. You were a witness, not a participant, which is a much lighter thing to be. Morning arrives whether or not the night went well. It has never once failed to. The light comes up on the good nights and the broken ones with exactly the same indifference. By mid-morning, most of what happened in the dark has already loosened its grip. That is not offered as consolation. It is simply the reliable behavior of mornings. which have been doing this without fail for as long as there have been mornings. Nothing here is asking to be repaired. A curve is not a wound. A seam is not a tear. A cold hour before dawn is not a symptom of anything but the turning of the planet and the body that grew up on it. There is no fixing to be done at 3 in the morning, and never has been. Your body is not waiting for your approval to rest. It began lowering itself hours ago without a signature from you. It will keep doing that tonight, regardless of what you conclude about how the night is going. The permission was never yours to grant in the first place. It was already given, long before you ever learned the word insomnia, and it has not been withdrawn since. Notice the plain things in the room. The weight of the blanket, the temperature of the air near your face, the particular quiet of a house at this hour. None of it requires interpretation. None of it needs a verdict. It is simply where you are. And where you are is a bed in the dark, which is exactly the correct place to be at this hour. This hour is soft, and it is passing. It has been passing the entire time you have been listening to it. Whatever is happening in your chest or behind your eyes belongs to a stretch of night that will not be here in the morning. Very little that gets decided at this hour survives the daylight anyway. By 9 in the morning, most of it will look smaller than it does right now, and some of it will have vanished completely. There is a difference between counting a night and resting inside one. Counting asks how many hours remain. Resting asks nothing. The body cannot tell the difference between the two while it lies still. The mind can, and the mind is the only part of you still keeping score at this hour. Everything below the neck stopped counting a long time ago. You have been carried through far more nights than you can remember. Every one of them had seams. Every one of them had a coldest hour. Most of them you would describe, if asked, as ordinary sleep. That is what ordinary sleep has always looked like from the inside. You have been doing it all along, through every one of those nights, without once being told how. So the waking was never the thing that was wrong with you. It was only the night showing through. A floorboard shows through a rug that has shifted slightly, and nobody calls the floor a fault. What made it heavy was the alarm you carried into it. You can set that down now. There is nothing to answer for at 3 in the morning. There never was. 100 quiet facts ago, 3 o'clock was a place where something seemed to be going wrong. Tonight, it turned into something closer to a map. We followed the strange rule that a waking has to last about 2 minutes before memory will record it at all, which means most of your surfacings were never yours to remember. We followed the cortisol curve to its peak and found that peak arriving after waking, not before it. What began as a question about a broken night became a description of an ordinary one. The waking was never the failure. It was the architecture, briefly visible. What you carry out of this hour is not a repair, but a smaller thing, and a better one. The waking can stay, and the alarm fastened to it can go. Perhaps these quiet hours gave the 3 o'clock hour a softer shape than it had when you lay down. A gentle like, or a subscribe, or passing this along to someone who knows that hour well, helps another person find their way to this same quiet. One quiet tap, one peaceful night at a time. Right now, your temperature is somewhere near the low point of its long descent, and warmth is leaving your hands and feet into the room without any instruction from you. The tide of the morning has not started yet. Nothing is being asked of you while it gathers. Let your whole body dissolve into that slow cooling, into the part of the night that has always managed itself. The thinness of these hours was never a flaw in you, and it does not need you awake to look after it. You can allow these thoughts to loosen now, the way heat loosens from the skin without effort. Let your shoulders grow heavy where they rest. If sleep comes, let it take you back into the part of the night that has never once needed your supervision. The Sleep Science playlist has spent many quiet hours in this territory, the place where the body's ordinary machinery meets the stories we tell about it. The next hour follows a question this one left open. What the mind does with a silence it did not ask for. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Gentle mind. The night was never keeping score. Gentle facts for restless minds. Sleep well. Good night.